we can, get this information out there. So right now I'm in a learning stage to answer your question. Like how I'm competing and figuring it out is learning, and figuring out ways to, to call data and sort data using AI. That has been like the main thing. And then lastly, just engaging with content creators who have delved into spaces the way I would like to see, particularly Black men delve into those spaces. Like I listen to a lot of Trevor, I listen to Bomani, just on the entertainment side, but they give really smart takes and they're using multiple platforms to disseminate good information. Even when they're doing lighter commentary. So I don't know. I'm still navigating that, to be honest.
No, that's a fair and candid response. Now, Norm, what are the challenges that you see? You're in a more traditional space.
And I think one thing that you mentioned earlier was the literacy. I think that's very important. Having programs like this, having this kind of platform, discussing, what is news, what isn't news, helping people to discern what's, what's factual, because that's the thing, I guess, where we're getting at with this. What can you trust? What's reliable? And I think that's really important. And on a day-to-day basis, I think we're still, at least in the print area, we're still boots on the ground. We're still talking to people. We're still interviewing. We're still doing a lot of the traditional ways of gathering news. And I think as long as, I think that's still important ways you gather news and make sure it's accurate. That's the one thing they used to teach in journalism school: accuracy, accuracy, accuracy. And I know when things are fast paced, sometimes they may have to change a little bit because you get new information. And I think that's one of the challenges we have, where the police may tell you one thing and we put it online, and then 2 or 3 hours later it changes to something else. And so then trying to develop trust, so people will trust what they're reading, because I mean that's what happens ultimately. People will follow news outlets that they trust. And so I think that that's a big issue as far as the news media today. And I was also getting back to that news desert, that making sure that there's reliable, legitimate news sources in your community. I think about Arlington, Texas. Hundreds of thousands of people live there. That's where the Dallas Cowboys play. You have a Six Flags, and at the same time, they didn't have anyone really covering Arlington, Texas news, daily news. And so I think some of those things have changed now, but a few years ago, that was the case. So I think that making sure that we don't have these big pockets of news deserts. And I think that's a challenge for all of us. But then also, even in Chicago, there's areas you think, well, how could you have a news desert in Chicago? You have 2 daily newspapers. You have Block Club Chicago. You got other web sources. You have the TV stations. You have the networks, everything. But at the same time, there's still this need for local news. I mean, whether you're a Republican or whether you're a Democrat or red state, white state, you still want to know if they decide to hike your garbage fee by 80%. You don't want to learn about it when you get it in the mail. You would love to read about it in some or hear about it in some kind of form to alert you, so you can show up at the council meeting and give your view about it. So.
Yeah, can I add just one quick thing to that?
Yeah, sure,
I was
absolutely.
going to say the other reason why that's so important is, if you go to a classroom with young people and you ask where they get their news, they're going to say TikTok. And what I normally don't see them think about enough is, where are the TikTokers? And I'm talking about the good ones. Where are they getting their news? It's 9 times out of 10 from print. And if we aren't supporting print, then where is the information going to come from? We think that AI is its own it's taking human inputs, and without the written word there are no inputs. So thinking about ways to change things, it was a very small video that I did where I took a news article I got the information from, and just shouted out the article that I put in and made a video, because I know this is how my audience receives information. And while I was putting it together, I was hoping that more, news outlets as well would figure out, which most of them are, that anchors have their own pages now, right? And they're telling you where you can find them and they're sharing stories. This is how people are getting their information. And so we have to keep up with, with the TikTokers and all these other things. But print has to be the cornerstone, or the written word in whatever iteration it comes has to be the cornerstone of all of that.
No, absolutely. Dometi, I could get in a whole soapbox about aggregators and content spinners. But what is the original source? And people don't seem to appreciate the original source or trust it. which is ironic because, you know, they'll trust their favorite TikToker, but not the source that he or she got the information from, which is mind blowing. But this is where we are, which brings up the next question. Are we in a fight for relevance, particularly with young Black men?
Yeah, I think so. I think we are, especially when it comes to like issues of pay. I mean, just trying to get young Black men to go through the steps to be prepared to work in a newsroom, you know, a newspaper. I mean, just look at the college stats. I mean, they're pretty grim. I was looking at something where it was a story on Howard University, and I think they said 19% of the student body there is Black male, 19%.
Yes. At
So
an HBCU.
at HBCU, at a famous HBCU, Howard University, you know, in a city that's, you know, very important for African Americans, and a historical city for producing all types of top African Americans. And when you look at that, you say, okay, so this is just period, just going to college. So then, you know, when you start cutting those figures, you know, more and more and more and more, you know, divvying up some, maybe majoring in, you know, I don't know, business. Some are majoring in, you know, I don't know, some hopefully want to become a doctor or a lawyer. Then you start getting to the numbers that want to go into journalism. It gets really small. And so I think, you know, just trying to get young men, young African-American men in colleges is a start. And I think then also once they get in there, trying to get them interested in journalism and understanding the reasons, the impact that journalism has in their life.
Yeah, and then the other end of that, we're definitely gonna war. I feel like journalism adjacent industries are more attractive, you know, just spouting off at the mic. If you can, if your goal, if you're in this for the wrong reasons and your goal is just to be seen, there are easier, less ethical ways to be seen. And I think that that is, and we're in an attention driven ecosystem as far as
Yes.
media goes. And there are, not only is the pay a challenge, but also, you know, if you have a well-balanced, neutral point of view, that's not exactly going to move the zeitgeist, right? And so, like, it's now there aren't as many any draws to doing this thing the right way. And then the last piece of it, man, I was just watching a academics interview or a video or something, and he said Joe Budden made $900,000 a month on his podcast, right? So if I'm a young 20 something thinking about, and I'm interested in journalism, may have started off interested in journalism, and I look at where things are going, am I going to go to a small market, work my way up, and figure that whole thing out? It's different. And then if you go the DIY route, well, here are your avenues. How do we make the avenues that are most necessary for the advancements of our people, for the intelligence of our people, more attractive? And so that is the fight that we have right now. And then the third piece is culturally, you know, the conversations that happen about Black men are usually about Black men, but not including us. I think that's why I like the TikToker Deontay Kyle or the podcast was so popular, because he speaks for a segment of Black men who are more thoughtful than most of what we see about us online. So now you also have that. So there's this perception of there's the whole uptick in misogynoir podcast. There's a whole ecosystem that is literally contending with what we're trying to do here. So, you know, the fight is evident right now.
No, absolutely. I mean, you raised a good word. I like your phrase DIY, do it yourself, because it seems, and that kind of dovetails with being your own brand, which is kind of where things are headed.
Yeah.
So that said, do you think that we need to kind of change the message to attract more young Black men? You know, when I say change the message, I mean, you know, traditional media paths have been presented for decades. So do we need to redefine how we attract them? And, you know, what is a responsible path that serves both worlds? You know, those traditional standards, but the new media platforms.
I love that, the frame of that question so much. I don't know that this is the right answer, but it's an answer. I think that one, yes, we need to speak differently and not tout that the traditional path is the only path. think it for a lot of people is the best path in terms of cutting your teeth, getting it done right, right? But the world is moving much faster. I didn't have that same pathway. And I can't tell young people that my path will be their path either, because mine is an anomaly, right? And so I think what we're going to have to do is develop, I don't know if it means certification courses. Like, I love night school journalism classes. I take a lot of classes with them. If we're seeing people not interested in higher education, if higher education is becoming too expensive, if people are seeing streamers make millions of dollars their same age and then come up with their own streamer university, well, why can't we have a fast course where we do workshop? And a lot of people are doing this. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but market towards Black men these classes where, okay, here are the basic tenets of journalism. Here, over the next 4 weeks, right, for 2 hours, you learn X, Y, Z. So at least when you go the DIY route, you'll know what you're doing. You'll verify your source, even if the source is a potential sports trade, which I feel that I know this is your world, right? Like these people need to know certain things. And I think that when we think about the tenets of journalism, people think about hard news, political news, but no, it matters in all these other areas that are attractive to young people. And so I think it might look like non-traditional educational programs and certifications that at least can look fly and make young Black men want to say, okay, I can do that. I can afford that and I can donate some time to that. And I also think it's on us to continue to do these things, show the behind the scenes and be fly. I think for so long we've had to
Mhm.
stifle our Blackness, what makes us cool,
Yeah.
and all of that. If I think that I have to be somebody I'm not to get there, I would rather see, I would rather see Norm in the flyers. I want to dress, I want to have that. I want to have the suit on like him, or if it's a guy who's more like me, I want them to see me in my element so they know that, yo, you can be a human being too. Doesn't mean you're unprofessional. Your Blackness is not an impediment to your career. It's a part of who you are. Now, you might have to modulate it when you get on the mic so everybody can understand what you're saying. But I think that thing too, some of the conservatism, and I don't mean political conservatism, I mean just like cultural conservatism within the news
Mhm.
industry can be off-putting to a lot of young men who I think will be really valuable in our space.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And I think that one thing though too, one thing that would have made my career move a lot faster is if I would have did an internship instead of doing, I was an athlete, I was going to school, I was working part-time, I was doing all of these things. And then when I finished, I had to go to job. So, hey, I didn't have any actual, boots on the ground experience other than working for the school publications. And so if I would have had, had some internships, some real good internships, I think that would have helped. And I think if we had more of those, that would, those who do go to the traditional route, who go to college, get an education, I think that would help a lot. And because even at the Sun Times, when we bring in young folks for internships, and the ones who have already had an internship, they do much better than those who have not. And I think just getting them, getting an experience as quickly as possible for them, whether it's print, broadcast, or whatever, that I think that'll help a lot. That goes a long way.
Dometi, I want to harken back to something that you mentioned because it kind of crystallized something for me, and I want you to weigh in as well, Norm. Uh, you mentioned kind of the restrictions or the bubble that mainstream media, traditional media puts around you, particularly when you are a product of a Black culture. I can see a young person, who's considering media kind of look at, weigh the pros and cons. On the one hand, the traditional route, working for a TV station or a newspaper, I have to go to school, accumulate student loans, and then even when I reach the quote unquote promised land, I still are going to have somebody telling me what to do and what I can and can't say versus a Kai Sanat. I can be myself. I can, amass these millions of followers, millions of dollars. I show speed. I can just be me and delve into the areas of quote unquote journalism that I want to or not. I can just do my own thing, and it's kind of this ever shifting thing. I mean, is it really come down to that's just what it is, those are your choices, or is there kind of like is that kind of fool's gold that not everybody is going to become a Kai Cenat?
Yeah, I think it's both, man. Like, if you watch us, do you know how hard it is to entertain people for 24 hours? All of us think we're interesting and entertaining. And most people,
Exactly.
and when you go to a lot of journalism classes and you ask them what they want to do, most of them want to be on air, but it's because they haven't been in a newsroom and realized, yo, I make beats, so I'm good with understanding instruments. I might be a good TD in the newsroom. I might be a good live switcher, or I might be a great producer because I have great questions, but I just don't have the on-camera pizzazz. But because we all have this and we all have social media accounts, we all everyone wants to be that. And without exposure, people don't know what the other options are. Here's a cameraman running around with Casanat who is making buku money and having all
Yes.
these. No one thinks about that guy. There's somebody in some office somewhere that is making
Yes.
sure the Twitch stream is running. Where's the education for those folks, and how many black men and women are in those positions? I'll say black men since that's what we're talking about. So like that's what we're contending with. And then you have these moments that happen that like I don't want to denigrate Kai, but like, you have streamers and Twitch folks who end up on carpets, and there are things that you should just know if you're covering the BET Awards. They're rappers you should have heard of. And so there's like you know what I mean? Like
Wale,
you should
Wale,
have heard of
maybe.
Wale, man. You should have known who Wale is. You ain't got to be a Wale fan. You should know who he is.
Exactly. This is what I'm
There's
talking about.
this,
Hit it, hit it.
yeah, yeah. But there's this, oh, I'm not that. So I get to, but your platform matters. So what does it look like if we have a free program where it's like, bruh, you can just look at this webinar for an hour and just, learn a little bit of what you need to know before you get out there. When we go on red carpets, we have face sheets that tell us who everybody is. I don't know who everybody I'm talking to, but you'll never know that, but that is unfortunately the responsibility a lot of these streamers have. So to answer your question, like we have to figure out ways around that. But I think news organizations also have to let loose of the reins a little bit. If they're going to be successful, their top anchors can't feel stifled or feel like, oh, if I get on a Twitch stream for longer than 10 minutes, something might come out that my employer might not like, or somebody else on my camera might say something that's going to become a thing. So I'm just gonna stay away from that to keep my job. Well, now this person has stifled all of the creative energy they have, and they might be in rooms telling streamers, yo, you get to be yourself, do this, right? So we got to find some balance with news organizations that allow folks to be themselves online. Still there's a standard, right? There's certain things I'm not going to do and say, but at the same time, you got to let folks be themselves if they're going to make this industry attractive to young people because they have to be online.
Norm, anything to add to that?
Well, I think that one thing I think, at least I've seen in the mainstream media, I think we bring a lot of our past, our culture to the job. I mean, with story ideas, the way we may approach stories. I think that some of that is who we are. I mean, that's why we want to bring, diverse views into the newsrooms. And so I think that some of that is we do that. I think that, you can tell. You can tell markets that have African American journalists. You can tell by some of the stories they write, and you can tell because they're tied to the community. That's who that's their community, and so I think that's very important. And I really strongly think I really agree with you when you were saying some kind of special program that could fast track people into journalism, because I think because the need is really needed, and then also some kind of expanded internship program that African American men can get involved in. Because when you start going to some of the other thing that I didn't really talk about is when you start paying your dues going to some of these markets, these smaller markets, and I'm gonna talk about it back in the 80s now. When you're going down to West Tennessee, it wasn't like it was the most welcoming place in the African American community school, but the overall community may not have been the most welcoming place. I mean, I went down to cover some meetings and they talk about sundown and like what, this kind of stuff. And I say creek, they say creek. I'm from Robbins, Illinois, so it was a lot of adjustment. And there was a lot of things that I ran into that was some of it was pretty bad. I mean, back then I remember there was a Haywood County. You heard of Nutbush song by Tina Turner, Nutbush, and that's in Haywood County. I remember 70% of that county was African American. And you know how many African American elected officials they had back then? Zero. No county black elected officials. So you were dealing with all of these cultural things and just semi Jim Crow things, and you still have places like that in America today. Now they've changed now since then, but But so when you're young, you're taking a young emerging African American male journalist, put him in some of these small markets. He's like, hey man, he may get turned off real quick and say, let me go do something else to make the ends meet. And then like another thing you talked about is student loans. There's African American males. There was a African American male who wrote a big piece that went around the nation about how he had all these student loans and why he had to leave American traditional journalism. So so yeah, you're right. We need to come up with some different pathways to attract African American males into newsrooms.
Yeah, I want to shift a little bit here. Kind of looking at the audience side. Yes, I think we all agree it's very important to try to attract these young Black men and try to create better pathways, more diverse pathways for them to get into this media space. But there's also the audience side, and I mean in terms of representation. If we don't value the journalism as a community, if we don't accumulate the tools, well, there's stories down the road that we'll be missing. I think, online, we think we can cover the news, cover our community in the comment section, and that's enough.
Yeah, that's real.
Yeah. So on that front, what do you think are the risks down the road for adequately covering our issues and our stories?
That's a big question. Norm, you want to tackle that first while I ruminate?
Can you why don't you talk about it a little bit more, Phil? Let me think about it for a moment as well. Phil? Yeah, what do you think about your own, since you raised the question, what's your thoughts on it?
Oh, I caught a little bit of that, but I think you asked me what are my thoughts on it.
Right. Yeah. Did I freeze up on here? I'm sorry if I did. No.
Yeah, no, your audio just went out. Sorry, folks. Yeah, we're just. I think we're back on track now. Yeah, I would say that. I think that traditional journalism tools have kind of been devalued. I think mainstream media is partly at fault for that because, particularly as it pertains to the Black community, we haven't always been the best caretakers of that. So, when people parachute in and try to cover a story and about us, and they either offend or get things wrong, and they haven't really truly applied what they should have learned in J school. I think that sends a message to the Black community. Conversely, I also think that because newsrooms haven't gone out of their way to attract Black people or Black men. Not all. I'm not saying all, but particularly in this environment that we're in, it's not necessarily valued. And then when you talk about being a glass ceiling, for people to become decision makers, to rise in the ranks, there aren't a whole lot of Norm Parishes right now. Let me put it that way. So I think when you look at those things, it's kind of hard to get that audience back to me and say, trust us. But I also think I trust in the tools of journalism to adequately cover stories. And I think that's why we need that representation and need them trained to adequately cover our community. Because otherwise, as Dometi alluded to before, people are just kind of flying off the cuff, doing their own thing, and they don't necessarily get the information right. Even if they may have the purpose, they may not have the wherewithal to do it justice. So I'll hand it over to you guys.
Yeah, and I think that we're seeing a lot of folks who are interested in news, right? Like I see, I've got friends who share articles, really to debate with me about something that they saw or read, and it's usually from an alternative source and is beginning to shape how they think about different stimuli. And at first it was upsetting to me because I'm like, man, this has been someone who's been sensible and thoughtful for as long as I've known this brother. But he's starting to be, pulled away from some of this media. But then I realized, no, it's encouraging because there's an interest. There's a sincere interest in learning about the world around us and taking in counter ideas and figuring out how for ourselves how we think about different things. Particularly, I don't want to get into a political conversation, but particularly it's just easier if I don't talk around it. I'm seeing folks warm up to Republican ideas and Trump, and not just Republicanism, which is fine, but Trumpism, and
Mhm.
who don't have a problem with seeing us fall into what might look like a dictatorship, right? And so you
Yes.
had a guy we're going back and forth about it, but the sources upon which he was basing his thoughts were all faulty. But he had went
Yes.
through them. He had watched hours of YouTube. He's sending me blog sites. So the interest is there. The interest is there. And when you going back to your original question, uh, going back to boots on the ground journalism and realizing that you're right. What we see in the comment section isn't always reflective of the people you talk to in person because they don't speak in person the way they speak in comments. They'll divulge more personal information maybe in person or they'll pull back a little bit. And those elements are what we're missing now. Love that things are moving fast and people believe they can cover their communities from home, but you have to go to community meetings. You have to go to, the watering holes that folks are talking real talk to figure out how this area feels about an issue. And, once we get back into that area of journalism and maybe
Mm.
even figuring out a way to broadcast those interactions, we'll get more authentic stimuli out there. But, it's a big problem and it's going to take a big solution. And I don't know how, I don't know where to start, but it does start with getting out there and talking to folks in
And
real.
I agree with you 200%. I mean, it's a huge problem. I went to a high school, and I won't name the high school in Chicago. It's a middle class African, primarily middle class African American high school. And they had this was a journalism class. It was like 7 o'clock, 7:30 in the morning. I didn't know kids would start at school at 7:30 in the morning. So I'm rolling up at high school at 7:30 in the morning. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, man, are these kids gonna be, they're gonna snore in the back of the classroom or what, But they were awake, they were alert, they were polite, they were nice. And we talked about journalism. I talked about the reasons why journalism is important, and they were interested in that. And I started giving anecdotes, talking about various political figures. I mentioned Prep Winkle. They didn't know who that was, and that's okay, but maybe they didn't know. And so then I tried to throw up a bone, and I mentioned the mayor. So like the mayor, and this was I'm not, like I said, I don't want to call out this high school, but this was a high school that had a decent football team, had a couple of football players. So these were motivated kids. They were nice. They weren't throwing paper at me. And they did not know, not one student in that classroom did not know who the mayor of Chicago was. Not one student. They didn't know who Brandon Johnson was. I tried to say Brandon. I was trying to, and I was blown away. And so what that told me, the mayor was on the news, TV news, every night that week. That's the week when he was fighting with the school superintendent. And so that means that they didn't know about that story, which the school superintendent, certainly that story would affect them in their school. And so they told me they weren't looking at TV. They told me they weren't listening to the radio. They told me they also weren't reading the newspapers. They weren't reading, and so because they didn't even know who the mayor of Chicago was. And I thought, my goodness. So, I said that. Now I think the teacher was a little embarrassed. And this was also, remember, this was a journalism class as well. So it wasn't like this was the geometry class and we're talking about the Pythagorean theorem, and all of a sudden I shift to the mayor. So, it was kind of heartbreaking to a certain extent. So then I asked, well, how many of you are, 18? I think the oldest one in the class was 16. So that means this person 2 years from now will be eligible to vote, and then they don't even know who the mayor of Chicago is, and at least, well, I guess they knew at that moment because I told them. But so I think and I don't blame those students for that. I blame the parents and I blame the schools for that. I don't blame them. They're, like I said, these students were ready to soak it all in. So I think there's a lot of big problems that we have that when we start trying to present news, because that told me they weren't looking at it, listening to any serious or reading any serious news to know what was going on in their world.
Well, I would ask you, gentlemen, what is something that you're doing to change the game, or do you have a thought about how we should be changing the game?
When you say change the game, in what ways? What do you mean?
I'm talking about in terms of media, like how we shape media in the future, particularly, in the hands of young Black men. Um, how can we guide them, or should we be guiding them, or are there lessons we should be taking from them?
That's a good question. I really don't know the best way to do it. The only way that I could see, because it's almost unfair as I go through the decision tree of like possibilities, right? It's almost unfair to expect, kids who got popular on Twitch for gaming to now be responsible with such information for a career that they didn't choose, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean educating, those folks, the most popular TikTokers, et cetera. But we do know that the young men are interested in TikTok and interested in gaming. So does it look like, using non even I think Roland Martin is great with this, with his online digital show, right? The epitome of DIY and someone from a previous generation who has figured that thing out. Does it mean folks like him, younger folks following that model and, the three of us having a show on Twitch? Does that look like, I really don't know what the answer is to get them interested. Because, I mean, it's funny because when you talk about a classroom of students who don't know the mayor, but they are journalism students, they are at a good school, they are the driven students, and they're alert at 7:30 a.m., it sounds bleak. And the only thing I can think of, because of how impressionable a lot of young people are and how much they love entertainment, is using that as an entry point and creating more figures that are likable, that they want to replicate and that they want to embody it. And I was shorty, I want to grow up and be like Jay-Z. Now the kids want to be like Kai, right? So who is the information purveyor that is cool enough to make the shorties want to be like them? What is the lifestyle that we show them? And I don't even mean from a materialistic standpoint, just I enjoy what I'm doing and you get to see me enjoy what I'm doing. How do we show that aspect of who we are? I think those things would have made me drawn to journalism much sooner than I was, because I got into it as an adult. So I don't know if that clearly answers the question, but those are the ways I'm beginning to think about it.
And that's a good way to think about it. I think, how do we get that TikTok space? How do we get in there to tell stories, and how do we get young people interested in particular young African American men or males and to think about journalism.
Mm-hmm.
Well, with that, I'm experiencing a little technical difficulty here, so I will hand it to Brandon to see if he wants to open it up to questions while I try to resolve this and get back into the chat. But if I'm not able to get in, I want to thank both of my guests, Dometi Pongo and Norm Parish. But please stick around to see if we have anyone that has questions.
Thank you, Phil. See, that's a consummate pro. Well, we didn't know you had technical difficulties. That's what I'm saying.
It's been all smooth, play that off like
yeah. I'm looking at half a face right now, and yeah, it's yeah. I have no tools. It's kind of acting up. So I'll be right back. Jim.
All right.
Thanks.
All right. You guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So questions we have here from Chandria Brownlow. In a time when platforms like TikTok are reshaping how stories are told and who gets to tell them, what role has mentorship played in your own media journey? And how are you intentionally supporting or guiding the next generation of young Black men entering the space?
Oh, I love that. My first mentors were people I never met. I think that that's the big thing. Like, the first book I read about journalism was when I was interning at WVON. My friend Barry Kelly gave me The Producer by Wendy Walker. Wendy Walker was Larry King's producer. And in my mind, Wendy and Larry were my mentors. Then I listened to a show on your channel, WBEZ made Oprah's podcast. She was my mentor through that show, through Jen White's telling of her story. So, and then I began to finally get into put myself in places where there was an ecosystem of men that could mentor me. And even the busy men, if I didn't think that I'd actually get lunch, I could just ask the question in real time. That getting outside and just getting in front of people's faces are so important. And what's been happening to me lately is, I love this panel because most of the people who ask to be my mentor are young women. who are interested in journalism, who want to be a part of this. And I'm not exactly sure, you know, why that is. I do get a couple of brothers who want to shadow me, and you know, but I'm not seeing the same interest or the dedication or and I'm vastly generalizing. But in my personal experience, a lot of if I'm going to a conference and I shake hands with folks and I say, hey, reach out to me, the brothers are usually slower to reach out. I don't know if it's the pride that sometimes our young men have. I don't know if it's just that women that I see in J school tend to be more organized and send follow-up emails, etc. So I think to answer the question on mentorship, I do have a lot of mentees. I let them shadow me. You know, I'll let them do a watch me at work day at Paramount or at my podcast, and and afterward we'll do lunch and I'll tell them how I do what I do. But what I think we all can do more of, including myself, is be more intentional and aggressive in reaching out to young men and calling them like, I'm going to grab you and pull you under my wing. Even if you don't decide to be a journalist, I'm going to let you know what I'm doing. I'm going to check in on you. I'm going to see if you're straight. And that's something that I haven't been the best at because I feel like a lot of the people who reach out to me, you know, they reach out to me. Like I have a lot of folks who reach out for the opportunity, but there are kids now that I'm talking about it that I know if I just reached out, he would be excited to talk to me and to learn from me, but he may not know that he can. So, you know, but mentorship helps the mentor as well as the mentee because we learn what's going on, what's outside right now, what are kids paying attention to, but it also reinforces the tenets that we began with that we may have steered away from sometimes because you walk a little straighter when you know somebody's looking at you.
Knowing what the kids paid attention to, I definitely could attest to that.
Yeah.
Another one we have here from Marcellus Griffin. Let's see. How do we as Black media outlets and podcasts and news aid positive movements and advocate, excuse me, and advocate in shining light on those people versus entertainment doing the work like Marcel or myself? Huh. Let me see if I can figure out what he's saying there. How do we as Black media outlets and podcasts and news aid positive movements and advocate in shining lights on those people? That's the question.
I think is he asking like how can we as journalists should we as journalists be shining more of a light on our communities? Is that what he's saying or
I
something
think
like
so. I think
that?
so. Yeah.
I think that's really important. That's like what I was saying earlier, bringing yourself to your job, your experience. If you're from Chicago, making sure that businesses that you know about or figures that you know about suggest them on stories. I think that's really important. If you're from another community, but there's a certain area that you're interested in that others may not be in, and bringing yourself to your job and putting it out there. I think that's really important. So.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to the great thing about this lack of a barrier to entry. You are seeing a lot of people who have different jobs outside the industry, have blue collar jobs, white collar jobs, etc. But they built an online community by having certain kinds of conversations and highlighting certain businesses or people that they admire. And that used to be it used to be institutions that had to do that, but there are a lot of grassroots. There's an honor award show called the Side Hustle Honors, based in Chicago, and it just awards regular people. I would love to figure out how we can get more press on that organization, where they're just talking about like a CNA who's killing it at her job, killing it at home, and who's inspiring people in her influential social circle. Like these are and that's literally what he does. The guy's name is Dr. Glenn Marshall, who does that organization. So, I think again, I'm always pointing the finger at myself first. I probably do more to highlight that. You know what I mean? So, to your point, Norm, I think that's where it starts.
Good stuff, y'all. And thank you, Marcel. Sheila Solomon says, love what Dometi and all of you are saying. What are you going to do about it? years ago, years ago, when I was working in Charlotte, I saw a young Nick Cannon before high school age learning to run a camera on public access TV. Where are similar opportunities where you are?
Here in New York, there's a organization called Brick, that does a lot of podcasting and such. And one of the things that I've been doing is availing myself to those outlets. So if there's a kid who has a podcast, and you'll see it on my timeline, like I have a couple of, you click on my reels, there are a couple of shows with bad production quality, no shade to those, but like where I'm a guest on that show because I know them being able to touch somebody who's been, who's been some of the places that they may want to go, how important that is, but also being able to, when I'm there in their space, say, hey, you might get better audio quality if you upgrade it to these mics when you're able. You might be able to do things with a cell phone better if you change these settings. Sometimes it's very simple, just giving that advice. You never know where it's going to take folks. But there's a program in New York called Brick. I don't know that they have a specific journalism course there, but it would be interesting speaking to what we're going to do about it to figure out how I can talk to them to see what are they doing in that space and donate some time there. And there's also a program in a vocational program, OpNet, here in New York that exposes young people to people in different professions. And I think it's super cool when they reached out to me because and the journalism cohort is normally I'm usually the only male, in that cohort. You know what I'm saying? So it changes the dynamic and you see how the young men tend to respond and feel like they have someone to relate to. But I think it's just availing ourselves to some of these outlets that are doing the work. And if we know that it can be done, that we can add something to what they're doing, being proactive about it, because I'll be honest, I tend to reach back whenever somebody reaches out to me. But I'm not as proactive in going and seeing because the time just doesn't feel like it's there, but what does it look like if we divide and conquer and say, yo, we're going to have a rotation of young men that we reach out to in our cohort and accountability group that we set time aside for. So, I don't know how to fully answer that question, but I think it starts with us proactively reaching out to some of the places that we may have volunteered for. And
I agree with you. I think you may have faded out, but that we should. I had mentors when I was younger. I had Monroe Anderson when I was in college. He's a retired journalist. He was a longtime journalist in Chicago. Gave me a tour of the Chicago Tribune when I was in college. I kept up with him. I served on a national board with him. He was a mentor. You need having someone that you could pick up the phone and talk to who's a veteran journalist. I think that's important. When I was in St. Louis, they had a very aggressive chapter there that dealt with a high school journalism workshop program started by George Curry and Gerald Boyd. Both of the course are no longer with us, and it went on for years, and I think still goes on. And it was intentional. It was a program designed to attract high school students, to expose them to the various aspects of media, print, broadcast, new media and such, and photography. And it was very intentional. And at the end of the day, they used to give out scholarships to those who actually want to be involved in journalism, and to Mizzou, to University of Missouri. So I think, like you're saying, I think we have to be very intentional and put in the time. And I admit I kind of stepped away from that a little bit, raising my own family. But now that my family is grown, I don't mind spending a little more time involved in it. I mean, at the time I was doing it, I would wonder sometimes, was I spending too much time volunteering and then away from my family? But I think it's something that you have to think about, and I think it's very important to give to yourself. I was even a big brother for a while, a little brother, and he's an adult now. But I think we have to be intentional and get involved with the young men.
But can I add one more thing to that? Because you just sparked it. The other thing that Sheila mentioned and I love is that young Nick was figuring out how to work the camera and, learning the other parts of the process. We're taking accountability, but then the other side of this is the shorty's got to hustle too. When I was at all of these different spaces at WVON, I was in Perry Small's ear, who was the midday host at the time, all the time asking questions. I was letting her red pen my writing, right, when I was doing our audio features. Kathy Cheney edited one of my pieces when I wrote those 2 articles for the Sun-Times. Like, we have to make time. We the mentee have to be aggressive as well. We have to be annoying. We have to. I hit up Sway, and sometimes you got to swing a carrot when you have an opportunity. I had a show that I was executive producing. I wanted some time with Sway, so I asked him if he wanted to be a co-EP on the show. We went to lunch and we had a real conversation about our contracts and such. When I was doing VON at a podcast called Brainstorm with Dometi, None of y'all heard of it because I ain't puppet like that. But what it did was I had guests on that gave me time with Ramon Dukes, who at the time was the head of news at Revolt. Somebody may say no to lunch, but they may say yes to being a guest on a show. So like there are moments where you can kind of coerce people into being your mentors. You know what I'm saying? And so I think the youngest need to also find creative ways to engage folks as well to make them say, hold on, wait, I see that guy playing with that camera right there. Let me go, hey man, what are you doing? You know, and so like we also have to we also as the people who want to come up be the ones that are intentional and aggressive about our career journeys and you know taking those opportunities where they are because you know some people are a little lax about that, some young people.
No, I want to add to what Dometi said and just boil it down to this: be a stalker.
Yeah,
You know,
that's right. That's right.
just you know, if you see somebody's doing something or you know has a career path that you think can help you know boost your own you know, go after that person and be relentless. Don't just send one email or one text and call it a day if they don't get back to you right away because successful people are busy. You know, I know both of you are very busy with what you do. So you got to be persistent. Be a stalker.
Yeah, right.
I love that. I love that. We got two more questions. Let's try to answer them quickly to wrap it at a decent time here. And Sheila, great question there. We appreciate you. Longtime NABJ Chicago member there and great journalist. Nico Suave says, if both of you could have did something different as far as the media space goes, what would it be and why?
Hmm.
I would have gone into law, a lawyer, because I think a lot of things happen that revolve around laws. We're a nation of laws. And I think if I wanted to make some change, and in fact, some journalists, a lot of journalists I knew back in the 80s and 90s did leave the profession to become lawyers. And I think that if I wanted to, you know, affect change and help folks, I think being a lawyer, that might have been an area that I would have pursued. And it still would allow me to write and such, but I think I would have chose law.
I don't think I would have changed a thing. You know, I've gotten very, very, very lucky. If opportunity plus preparation equals luck. I've my opportunity met prep, and I have been lucky to have my interests align in so many of my projects. So much so that when I have to do something that doesn't align with my interests, I do it happily because I'm like, well, it's been a couple months since I had an assignment I didn't like. So, you know, I don't think I'd change a thing. I think I'll do everything just as it is. And I will, in this next iteration, take my own advice and be more aggressive about the ideas that we pitch, the executives that we meet, and creating true friendships with them if we can, in relationships with them, and you know, cross-functionally working within the Paramount system. It has so many brands at the company. I'm in a unique position to talk to different folks, and sometimes I can you know, not be as aggressive as even as aggressive as I think I am. I can be more proactive in texting some of the numbers that I have in my phone and seeing how I can connect certain dots.
And
That's
I,
probably
and I, and I don't want to give the impression that you know, that I don't love journalism. I love journalism. I don't want to, but I mean, but if someone said you have to leave or this is your career path should go in another direction, that would have probably be the path I would have chose. But no, I don't regret journalism, being a journalist at all. I love it. I've been doing it for, you know, more than 4 decades. So I mean, obviously I love it. But no, if someone said you have to change directions and you have to do this, it would have probably been law or a teacher or an educator, you know, but something but you know.
Love it. I would have been a Power Ranger. Let's see. Last question here is from Eddie. Um, let's see. Eddie says, "Oh, this is a big one. Hot button. What are your thoughts on how AI is transforming the space? Do you feel it's taking power away, or is it empowering?" Ooh,
shout out to Precise over at Rolling Out if that's who I think it is.
that's exactly who it is.
Okay. Okay. I think it can be empowering. I think anything can be a tool if we use it. I always think about this analogy. Every time I'm resistant to change, I think about how the music industry responded to Napster. You know, they did lawsuits, they were angry, et cetera, et cetera. But Jimmy Iovine went and a whole bunch of folks, you know, well, Jimmy Iovine's now with Apple, but like Apple created iTunes way back when. And now we've seen where that's grown. And now we found out that it wasn't so much that people wanted to pirate music, they wanted to figure out how to consume it digitally. And if there was a paid model, then they would do it, and now we have streaming, and now we have, so it started from that. But the first inclination of the dying industry or the changing industry was to fight it. So, you know, at the top when we were talking about AI, I'm like, okay, how do I not be a hater? So how can I use this tool to empower ourselves? Do I think it's damaging and dangerous? Yes, because I think there are dangerous actors who have their hands on it also. But do I think once we figure out how to use it ethically, we'll be more powerful than anyone else? I can ask ChatGPT how to run a camera. I will never be you know, Christopher Nolan. It doesn't matter. You know, it just can't happen. Similarly, folks can ask Chat GPT to write them a paragraph or to fix something, but they'll never be able to do what Norm and Phil do. So I think once we're able to figure out how we're going to utilize this thing, not saying help us write, but whatever we need to do, one of the best ways I've been able to use AI, I'll take a 1 hour interview, I'll put it in this program called Opus Clips. It dissects the clips and cuts them into 1 minute vignettes, and it picks based on its own algorithm and some of the inputs you put in what they think the most engaging clips will be. Now, why am I going to sit down to do this all day when I can have Opus Clips do it? Now, I love to fund editors because I don't want this to take the job of my editor, and I know there are changes that he can make better. So I use this as a template to give to my editor. Yo, take this time code, smooth this out, take this angle, add the two shot, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we can use AI to make a process that would take several days, require me to get on Rev, transcribe it, and create this content to churn out an hour-long interview into several vignettes that an editor can make smooth and quick in less than a day. So I think it is empowering if you choose to think about it the right way.
I just want to add to though, I hear what you're saying. I think as long as we are conscientious users of AI and we fight for the conscientious usage of AI, then it's fine. You try to roll with it. You try to maximize it for what it is. But the minute that your bosses say, "Oh, we want to make a digital Dometi and your services are no longer required," that's where I have an issue. And there are CEOs that are salivating thinking about that, where they can remove the human factor. I think as audiences, we have to say, that's not acceptable. What is the point if we're not going to have humans driving this thing?
I had a friend who's doing an audiobook, and they asked if they could use AI to do the part to do the pickups using his voice. Of course, it was an adamant no. And it was,
Yes.
but the conversation, this is what's probably going to be in our contracts in the next coming years. And so I'm not being naive. I'm just trying to change my brain. But you are absolutely right. Because when he said that, and then sometimes they use AI to do scratch video for some, documentary and voiceover pieces. And
Yeah.
the AI might sound like a better you than you. Right? Like let's say they use a version of you that didn't have a code that day, right? And so it's a very scary time. So, I'm trying to find optimism within it, but I agree with you wholeheartedly. Yeah.
That's a
No,
tough one.
we just have to stake our claim in this space, and it's not going to be an easy fight, but I think it's something we have to be mindful of.
Yeah, that's a tough one. AI is definitely something we're going to keep an eye on, and I'm definitely something we're going to have a program on for NABJ Chicago in the future. Any closing thoughts from you, gentlemen?
Oh, no, I'm just grateful to be on this conversation. And I think that, listen, when people see themselves represented in different spaces, they move accordingly. So I think that having more of these conversations, I think that it's even powerful to even notice that, that there aren't as many Black men in the room. And that is the impetus. And so, we have some of our marching orders, but also it feels good to just vent with you brothers and kind of unpack mentally some of the things that I've been thinking about. And so, I hope that you guys continue to do more of these, and it's been an honor and a privilege to dialogue with y'all.
Same thing. Thank you for doing this, Brandon and Philip and others who put this together and thought about this. I think this is a conversation that's long overdue, and I'm so thankful to be part of it. And I love the ideas that came up and put me back on notice. Say, what am I doing? What are you doing? And so, as Margaret Burroughs used to say, what is your legacy? What do you want your legacy to be? So thanks, NABJ Chicago.
Well, thank you for that, Norma. I just want to add that, you know, part of this discussion is it has to be a living discussion. That means it has to move forward into the future. So if, you know, you're a young person, or even if you're already in your career and you want to continue this conversation, or you have questions, or you need to make connections, I want you to reach out to us either through nabjchicago.org, or, you know, you can reach out to me personally, Phil Thompson, you know, Vice President of Print, and also I'm chairman of the Mentorship and Community Outreach Committee. So I want to help facilitate, and we want to help facilitate these connections. So just reach out to me at phil@nabjchicago.org, or like I said, just visit the website and reach out to whoever you like.
That's right.
All right, y'all. Thanks to everyone who attended. Thank you to our panelists, Norm Parish, Dometi Pongo. Thank you to our amazing VP of Print, Philip Thompson. Have a great night, everybody, and be on the lookout for more programming, including next month our National Candidates Forum for NABJ elections. Definitely going to be an interesting one. I'll catch you guys later.
All right.
Thank you, Brandon.
Thank
you, Dometi and Norm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please.
Brandon, are you still there, or are you gone?
I am. Yeah, I'm about to end it.
We're off the air?
We are about to be. One sec.